Hey everybody! I've been meaning to do this video for years. I think it was like 3 years ago that Matt Moran asked me to do a video on my car history. So here I am finally getting around to it. And I've made a little list of cars that I've owned, and it's not a complete list even. It's, you know, it's all the major cars. You know, I've owned cars that I've purchased for girlfriends or were quick interim cars. They don't make the list. But before we even get to the list of cars that I've owned, I had a long driving history before even owning a car, before even getting a driver's license. You know, I grew up in the country in New Zealand, you know, rural New Zealand, where for a lot of people driving happens very early in life, and I was particularly interested in driving, so I taught myself how to drive a car at 8 or 9 years old. I could ride motorbikes and drive tractors, you name it. I enjoyed machinery, and so my father used to put me to work, you know, driving tractors and mowing and so forth on the farm. So I was quite an experienced driver long before I got a driver's license. So much so that I even remember driving the family home when I was like 12 years old because my parents had had too much to drink, and I'm in their big station wagon trying to see over the dashboard. But yeah, I probably did a lot more driving than I should have before I got my license. To my father's credit, he never murdered me either, even though I did quite a lot of damage to farm equipment and his cars when I was younger, including his Humber 80. Now, my father's not a car person. His cars were always very bog standard, middle of the range utility vehicles, basically. To him, a car is not an important thing. It's something that just gets you from A to B. So he always purchased middle of the line Holden Commodores, which is a General Motors car in New Zealand and Australia. Sort of the SL or the SLX models or the Bellina models, really plain middle of the line models, which I used to, when he used to buy a new car, I used to sit out in that car for hours and read the manual from cover to cover, which was a little depressing because all it told me was all of the features that my father's car did not have. But that was him. He's just never liked cars. And as a child, I used to love cars, and I used to spend hours cleaning his car for him. He hadn't asked me to. In fact, he hated the fact that I cleaned the cars for him, because my father's one of these people that likes to blend in, and so nothing worse for my father than someone asking him if he's got a brand new car, which in the country on unsealed roads, if your car's clean, it often means because it's a brand new car. So Dad definitely didn't want his car cleaned, but I'd clean it for him, and you know, within 2 or 3 miles down the road it was dirty again, so it was a big waste of time. But yeah, I love cleaning cars and I love sitting in cars, and that also extended to, you know, because I didn't get exposure to interest in cars very often, whenever one of my parents' friends came over and they had a nice car, you know, a BMW or an Alfa Romeo or something, I'd immediately ask, you know, can I go sit in your car? And they'd be, I guess so, and I'd sit out there and I'd push the buttons and I'd just dream. And I remember thinking, man, how do these people sleep at night? You know, if I owned this car, I'd just be driving all the time. I mean, oh man, this would just be so cool. It was just my dream. And I remember in the 80s, my parents took us on a trip around the world. We went to the US, here to the US and around Europe for a few months, and I got to see all of these cars I didn't get to see when I was growing up in New Zealand. But the car that really struck me was the BMW E30. This was the mid 80s, and I was just a little kid, and that shape, that E30 BMW, that was my dream. I was, oh my God, imagine driving that. That car was so cool. I didn't even want the M3. I just wanted any basic E30 BMW. I just thought they were the coolest looking cars in the world. So I thought, one day I'll own one of those. It's on the list. So yes, that was my childhood. The only other story I have from my childhood, I have lots of stories from my childhood, but yeah, as I said, my father wasn't a car person, but he did have one car that was near and dear to his heart. And I actually don't know what the reason was. Maybe it was the first car he got laid in or something like that. But he had this car called a Humber 80, which is a British car. I think his was a 59 or a 60. And it was a 1500cc 4-cylinder, 3-speed on the column with a reverse. And it was just a car that was kept in a shed out the back for whatever reason. He never drove it, he just kept it there for some sort of sentimental reasons. And whenever I could get the opportunity, whenever I was out of Dad's vision, like Dad was out fishing or doing something where you couldn't catch me, I was, let's take the Humber for a spin. And it didn't have a battery. Normally the battery was shared with the boat, and so if Dad was fishing, it didn't have a battery, but it was an old car, so it had a generator, not an alternator. So as long as you could get the car started, get it moving fast enough, you could jump it in second gear and it would continue to run. So whenever I had friends over and my father wasn't around, that's what we did. We took the Humber for a spin on the roads. And this particular day, a good friend of mine, Steve Mayers, was down from the city. And by the way, his version of the story differs slightly in that I'm to blame, not him, but whatever. And I was, let's take the Humber for a spin. And so we got the tractor and we put the big chain around the back of the tractor and then around the front axle of the Humber. And my instructions to Steve were, get the tractor up to its top speed, about 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, and I'll pop it into second gear and we'll jump start it and I'll wave or toot once the car started, and then we'll go driving. Well, Steve took my instructions quite literally, and he had got the tractor up to its top speed, but he hadn't got the chain taut first. So he took off down the road and the chain was unraveling in front of the car, and there was nothing I could do. I could just see the disaster about to happen, because the tractor, being such a big heavy vehicle, there's no give, and there's a chain, there's no give. So he just ripped the whole front end out of the Humber, which was a disaster. It was terrible. We got the tractor, we turned the tractor around. I was, oh my God, how are we going to cover this up? Dad's going to murder me. This is his pride and joy car, and I've just torn the whole front end out of it. But yeah, to my father's credit, he never murdered me. I don't know. That car just got buried. Nothing was ever said. Yeah, it must have hurt his feelings. I don't know. Yeah, whatever the case, I didn't die, which is surprising because I'd done a number of other terrible things growing up as well, and my father hadn't killed me. So credit to my father for not murdering me. Just as well I didn't have children, I think. Anyway, on with the list. My first ever car. Oh, by the way, I got my driver's license when I was 15 years old. In New Zealand at the time, it changed just after I got my license, but in New Zealand at the time you could get your full driver's license the day you turned 15. So I turned 15 on a Wednesday, I had my full license on a Friday, and I think I crashed my first car that following Sunday. So yes, I got my driver's license very young, and I was a terrible driver. Well, I think I was quite skilled, but I just drove too fast. I drove as fast as I could everywhere, which led to trouble. But yes, my first ever car was a 1989 Ford Laser Gear. Now, I don't think there's an American equivalent to this car. It had a 1.6 litre engine, 103 horsepower, which is about 77 kilowatts, 5-speed manual, and had a top speed of 185 kilometers an hour, or 115 miles per hour. And I thought this car was the fastest thing on the road. It was a 5-door, it had velour seats, it was cool. I thought it was cool. It was a nice little car. It had air conditioning. Yeah, I really loved this car. It was a good first car. Nothing went wrong with it. I crashed it. It wasn't really my fault. I was driving at night behind this Mercedes on a bit of a road trip in New Zealand, and a drunk driver came around the corner on the wrong side of the road and hit the Mercedes head on and cancelled. Both cars hit each other at such high speed, they just sort of combined into one car, killing the occupants, and then I hit them. And so yeah, that poor Laser, it did get fixed, but it wasn't good after that, so I sold that car. But yeah, that was a bad accident that I was in, and it sort of hung with me for a while, because it was on a very deserted road and there was no one else there, and I was actually in the fire brigade at the time, and so I knew first aid and I could help as people as I could, but it was 20 minutes before first responders turned up, and during that time quite a few of the occupants of those cars had died. But Yeah, we managed to save, I think 3 people lived, but yeah, bad accident. And that was the sort of the end of my first car, which I give my first car an affection rating of 8 because it was a good car, nothing wrong with it, and because it's my first car, it gets a high score. Now, my second car, I wanted to get myself something a little bit more special, something European, something a bit sporty, so I got myself an Alfa Romeo. It was a 33 1.7 IE cloverleaf model. It had slightly more power at 110 horsepower or 81 kilowatts, also 5-speed, also 5-door, and had a slightly higher top speed of 118 miles an hour or 190 kilometers an hour. And it looked just like this car. I don't actually have a photo of my Alfa Romeo, I can't find one, but it looked exactly like this car, but it was dark green. And I thought it looked beautiful. Now at the time, the motoring press were very unkind to my Alfa 33. They called it the Italian ape. And nobody really liked them, but I thought they were beautiful and I really liked the way it drove. The problem with this car was that it was very picky about when you could drive it. You see, it was about 3 years old when I purchased it, so it was just out of its warranty, which was unfortunate because when it rained, the wipers didn't tend to work. And when it was left in the sun or when you drove it in the hot heat, for some reason the power locks short-circuited and they just pop up and down constantly. So you didn't really want to drive it in the rain and you didn't really want to drive it in the bright sunlight. And you also really didn't want to drive it at night because the headlights were also a bit on and off. And the funny thing was, each time I took the car in to the Alfa Romeo dealership to get these things fixed, firstly, there was always another Alfa 33 there, or several of them, all with the same problems. And they could never replicate the problems. Like, they never fixed anything. It just cost me a fortune to take it in, and they never fixed anything. So as much as I loved the look and how that car drove, it was such an onerous car to own that I didn't have it that long, maybe a couple of years. Yeah, I loved that. I still loved it, even though it was just a giant pain in the ass and nothing ever worked on it. So within a year or two, I decided to get myself a motorcycle. So I'd owned small motorcycles before this, which I won't talk about here, but I wanted to get myself a decent motorcycle, had my full motorcycle license at this point. So I got myself a Kawasaki ZZR600. It was about a year old when I bought it. It was a 92, it had 100 horsepower, and for a 600 it was pretty fast. It could do about 150 miles an hour or 240 kilometers an hour, which I regularly did. How I managed to not kill myself, I don't know. But yeah, I really loved that bike. I thought it was pretty, and it was sort of a mid-range sport tourer. It was a nice, comfortable bike. It was a pretty upright seating position. Yeah, pretty nice. And William used to ride around on the back with me. Here's a video of William and I riding that bike. But I did need a car, so I decided to go back to the safety of a Japanese car because my first car was Japanese and that would have been very reliable, and so I wanted something reliable again, but something sporty. So I got myself about a 2 or 3 year old Mazda 323 Astina GT, which is a specific model to the New Zealand market. There was a similar car in Australia, but the New Zealand market was a bit more upmarket. It had a 1.8 litre engine, double overhead cam, 104 kilowatts or 142 horsepower. So not fast by today's standards, but you know, mid-90s, it was pretty fast. And I could eke 200 kilometers an hour out of that car on a regular basis, which is about 125 miles an hour. Here's a photo of me actually doing that speed in that car. Yeah, it was faultless, like all Japanese cars. I really like the color. It was a teal color. Mazda still has this color in some of their cars today. I'd like to get that color in a car again. Yeah, God, no problems with this car. It had a 1990s phone car kit in it, you know, one of those ones where you actually lift the receiver up and talk. Yeah, so I really loved that Mazda. It was faultless. It looked cool. It never caused me any troubles. Yeah, it was really cool. I give that an affection rating of 9. My next car was my first brand new car to me. It was a 1997 Audi A3. Once again, this is not a model that came to the US, but it was very popular around the rest of the world. And it was a sort of a cornflower blue. And what was cool about it was it had cornflower blue checkered seats on the inside, all matching. Very, very gay. It was cool. I loved it. And I tinted the windows and I tinted the back lights, and the engine was the very standard 1.8 turbo engine that was in all the Volkswagen and Audi cars at the time, at 150 horsepower, but it was very tunable. So, you know, I did a stage 1 tune and changed the filters and fluffed around with it, made a bunch of modifications, got up to about 185 horsepower, which would give the car about a top speed of about 225 kilometers an hour or 140 miles an hour. Yeah, it was a good solid car. My first custom built car to me. Very, very cool. I give this car an affection rating of 9. 3 years later, it was time to get rid of that car, and I wanted to get something a little bit bigger, a little bit more mature. You know, I was in my 20s and I wanted to, you know, look a little bit more upmarket. So I decided to get another Audi. I got an Audi A4, 2000 A4. It was sort of the end of that model line, and it was a Quattro model. And they came standard with a similar engine to the A3 that I just had, but it came standard at 180 horsepower. So I tuned that and I got about 220 horsepower out of it. So that car was a little bit faster, about 240 kilometers an hour, 150 miles an hour. Here's a photo of me going that speed in my Audi A4. Yeah, it was I think it was called hibiscus red, that color. And it had a really cool dash. The dash was all red lettering. Yeah, I had a lot of affection for that car. Electric seats and all the toys in it. It was a very nice car. No troubles with that car either. Very, very solid car. I give that car an affection rating of 7 because it wasn't that interesting. It was a really nice, sensible car, but nothing too great. So when I sold that car, I actually moved to England and I bought a car in England, another Audi. This time it was another A3, the new generation A3. Had the 3.2 litre engine in it, 250 horsepower, and this one had the dual clutch transmission. And you might say, why didn't you get the manual, Nick? Well, at the time, the dual clutch transmission was the first dual clutch transmission in any Audi car, and it was a revelation at the time. This was 2004, and it was a big deal. The dual clutch transmission, wow, it could shift faster than manual. It was the way to be, so I got that and I was very happy with it. And that car, yeah, I had that car for 4 years while I lived in England. And I used to take it to Germany and do the Nürburgring on the weekends with that car. It was a really fun car. And it could also do about 155 miles an hour or 250 kilometers an hour. And I actually have a photo of when I picked the car up from the dealership. As I was driving home from the dealership, I think I did 150 miles an hour in that car. And if you look carefully at the speedometer, like it's got 50 miles on the clock. That was me breaking that car in, trying to get it up to its top speed. And to be fair to that car, no problems, not a single problem with that car. And I kind of regretted selling that car. I was thinking, because the steering wheel's on the right hand side of the car, same as in New Zealand, in England. And I was sort of considering maybe I should just ship that car back to New Zealand and have it as my New Zealand car. But about that time, I just purchased the next car on the list. And I decided I didn't need 2 cars in New Zealand, so I ended up selling that car, which was sad because I really loved that car. So the next car is a car I purchased in New Zealand around 2005, which was my dream car, a 1990 BMW E30, a 325 SE. It wasn't the M3. Perhaps I should have got the M3, but yeah, I just wanted my dream car, and my dream car, strangely, was a 325 SE, and it had the automatic gearbox, and it was just a cruiser car. And I purchased it from an old lady who was the only owner of it in New Zealand, and I've spent the last, I don't know, 20 years or so throwing money at this car to get it back to factory original, as close as I can get. I mean, it is just perfect inside. On the outside, it's really is like stepping back in time. So whenever I visit New Zealand, I get to drive this car, and I absolutely love it. And it really is. I feel like sometimes I'm driving and I think, oh my God, I can't believe I've actually got one of these cars. You know, it's the car that when I was 11 years old or 10 years old, that's the car I dreamed of owning, and now I've got it. And it's a real thrill. It's funny how when you get to drive your dream car, even though it's 30 years old, it's still pretty cool. So yeah, I've still got that car today, and it sits around in New Zealand. It's the 2.5 litre inline six. It's 170 horsepower. I think it can do about 200 kilometers an hour. I've had it up to 190 kilometers an hour. It's too old. I don't want to push it too hard. So, and it's only a 4-speed automatic. So you don't want to stress it out too much. But yeah, it's a good cruiser for when I'm in New Zealand. I have a lot of affection for that car. So I give it an affection rating of 9 because it's my dream car. Yeah, I'd give it a 10. Perhaps on reflection, I should have probably got a manual gearbox, but I don't need it. The automatic's fine. It's a cool car. My next vehicle was another motorcycle. So while I lived in London, the problem with living in London is that the traffic is so terrible. I decided to get a motorcycle, and because I'm a bit of a Kawasaki fan, I bought myself a Kawasaki ZZR1200, and it was a terrible choice of bike to buy because I'm trying to get around the city streets on a big heavy 1200, but I wanted something fast. For whenever I was driving on the continent, I wanted to be able to do 170 or 180 miles an hour, which is why I chose this bike, and so that's why I got it. And it was a black bike. It was about a year old when I got it, and it was 160 horsepower. At the time, it was the fastest carbureted motorcycle in the world. Yeah, I think the Blackbird and the Hayabusa were the two bikes that were more powerful than it. But yeah, it sounded so great, and it really was a great touring bike. And it was also the bike that sort of made me a little more sensible, because I used to ride so fast on it that one day I just decided, you know, I'm doing 170 miles an hour on the highway, actually racing a Porsche at the time. And it was the first time in my life that I actually thought, you know, Nick, you could die here. So yeah, that bike taught me a little bit of restraint. So that was cool. And I owned that bike right up to when I moved to the US in 2008. And that's when I sold the Audi and I got rid of the bike. And that bike, I really like that bike. I give it an affection rating of 7. Yeah, pretty high rating. It's a very sweet bike. So when I moved to the US, I was living in California, and I immediately put an order in for a BMW M3, the E90 model. I think the color is Interlagos blue. What were they? 414 horsepower, and I don't know, that's about 309 kilowatts. I also got that with the dual clutch transmission because I was so impressed with the dual clutch transmission in the Audi. I decided this is BMW's first dual clutch transmission. Let's give that a try. Now, I never really liked the dual clutch transmission in the BMW that much, but I love the car generally. It was the last of the naturally aspirated M3s, had the 4-litre V8. Yeah. What a great sound, what a great driving car. I was just in love with that car. And I drove that car all over the country. My girlfriend and I at the time, a girl called Debbie, she was a big driver as well, so we would take long road trips, and we actually drove all the way across the States and back again on road trips. And so that car did a lot of miles, and it came, a funny story about this car was I didn't get it at first. When I first ordered it, the first one that I ordered was actually lost in a shipping incident. Some sea carrier in 2008 turned over in the sea and lost a bunch of BMWs and other cars, and my car was on the carrier. So it took me months to get this car, longer than I should have, because my car was lost in the ocean. So the BMW ended up sending me another one, and when I got it, it was actually broken. The suspension, the electronic suspension was broken, so it took them another month to get those parts. So it took me forever to get this car, but once I got it, I absolutely loved it. And I actually kept this car for 5 years, which is the longest I've ever owned a vehicle at the time, simply because there was nothing else I loved more. You know, it was a great car, and I think I did 80 or 90, maybe close to 100,000 miles in this car over the 5 years that I owned it. It was really a special car. And it's still owned by someone that lives locally. I keep meaning to track that person down and take that car for another spin. Yeah, really, really great car. I have an affection rating of 9 for that car. One of my favorite all-time cars. Yeah, so while I owned that BMW, I decided as well to get another motorcycle because I really enjoyed owning a bike while I was living in England. So I decided to get exactly the same bike again, just a couple of years newer. They'd actually stopped making the ZZR1200, they'd moved on to the 1400. I didn't really like the look of the 1400, so I decided to get another 1200 again. So I got exactly the same model, this time in blue. And what was the funny story about buying the second ZZR was that I was looking on Motorcycle Trader and I found one, and it was really bizarre. It was 2 years old or 3 years old, something like that. But it had less than 100 miles on the clock. So I called the owner. I said, what's the story? Is it really got less than 100 miles on the clock? He goes, yeah, I bought it 3 years ago, took it for one ride, scared the shit out of myself, and it's been in the garage ever since. My wife has finally said, sell that bike. So it doesn't start, it's just sat there, I don't know what conditions it's in. I paid $14,000 for it brand new, make me an offer. So I made him an offer of $7,000, and he said, it's your risk, come pick it up. So I went and got a trailer and I picked it up, changed the oil, changed all the rubbers, the tires, etc., and changed the battery and pressed the button and it started right up. I got myself a brand new bike, basically, brand new bike. It had less than 100 miles on it for half price. I was so pleased, and it was a sweet bike. Yeah, the story behind that bike was a bit weird. Was that, yes, I live here by that time I'd moved here to the northeast into Connecticut. And what's funny about Connecticut is that if you're a middle-aged white guy, you tend to ride Harley Davidsons. And the sports bikes, like the Japanese bikes, are mostly ridden by black guys. So I wanted to find guys I could ride with. And I from New Zealand, I don't know social norms or whatever. I just decided there's a gang of guys who have got Japanese sports bikes. So I rolled up to them one day. And it was a sort of a biker gang of black guys, you know, and they were amazing riders. So they were always on the front wheels and doing crazy things. And I just bowled up to them. Hey, can I ride with you guys? And they're all, what, is this guy a cop? Why do you want to ride with us? You know, they were very suspicious of me, but they were cool. They let me ride with them. And yeah, they broke a lot of laws. Like, they were always weaving in and out of traffic, which I wasn't willing to do. But yeah, the one time that I was with them that we got pulled over by the cops were being pretty rough with us, like being really aggressive. And once I pulled my helmet off, everything changed. Yeah, it was bizarre. It was bizarre. And from that moment on, the guys were, yeah, hang with us as much as you like. So that was cool. But yeah, it's tough riding motorcycles here in the Northeast. You know, it's either too cold in the winter, you can't really ride in the winter, and it's often too hot in the summer. So there's sort of a few weeks either side, and people aren't careful about bikes like they are in the rest of the world. I never really felt comfortable on my bike, so I only kept it for a couple of years and sold it. And that's the end of my motorcycling career, I think. Yeah, it's not, I just didn't enjoy riding bikes here in the Northeast. It just didn't feel safe. So that was the story of my Kawasaki ZZR1200. I also give it an affection rating of 7. It was a good bike, just not the right environment, I don't find, for riding around here. Anyway, after 5 years of owning the BMW, the V8 BMW, I purchased my first Porsche. My dream of owning a Porsche came true. Traded the BMW and custom built my first 911 Carrera 2S, dark blue, with PDK transmission, probably a big mistake there. And you guys know the story of this. It did not go well. That car had problems from the beginning. It was a nightmare. There was smoke coming out of the dash. It was always stuck in one gear or another. It spent way more time at various Porsche service centers than in my possession. And in the end, I made a video about all the problems for that car, and Porsche bought it back. And yeah, that car had serious problems at the beginning, and it was a real disappointment. But we soldiered on, and yeah, it sort of started in a lot of ways started my YouTube channel. So I can thank him for that. And it was still a good experience. yeah, it's a shame that car didn't work out. It really was a disaster. People always blaming me for wrecking it, but I don't think I ever did anything to that car that would have caused it to have the major problems that it had. And it actually sat with Porsche. They rebuilt that car for about a year, I think, and they finally resold it, and it's down in Texas somewhere now, I think. Anyway, yeah, it started my YouTube channel, so that's all good. Yeah, had a lot of response to that video. So during the time that I had the problems with that Porsche, I could see the writing on the wall that it was going to go back one way or the other, because yeah, even Porsche was saying, we really need to buy this car back, it's a dangerous car. So I thought I'd better have a backup car. So I decided to buy a Volkswagen Golf. And I actually went to the local Volkswagen dealership here in Connecticut to look at a GTI. But while I was on the lot, I noticed something very strange. On the used lot, next to the car that I'd gone to buy, was a brand new Golf, but with the wrong window sticker on it. That is, it was a 2013, but the window sticker said it was a 2011, and it said it was a 2-door and it was a 4-door, and it said it was grey and it was blue. There was something wrong, but the window sticker showed the correct VIN number. So I thought, let's give this a try. So I went in and I saw the lady, sales lady, and said, hey, I'm interested in this VIN number. Can you pull it up? And she pulled it up, and on her computer it all showed all the wrong information as well. So I made them an offer. I made them an offer, I think it was $13,500 or $14,000, and they took it. And they said, you want to take it for a drive? And I said, no, I'm ready to buy it, you know, blah, blah, blah. I went down to the bank and got a cashier's check, and I purchased the car and got the insurance. And that's suddenly when the game was up. Like, I thought, am I buying a brand new car here for a used car price? Like, I was getting 10 grand off this car. It was a $25,000, $26,000 car. It was a Golf SE, no, it's Golf SEL. It had the sunroof and the alloys and all the fancy bits. But it was the 2.5 5-cylinder engine automatic. It wasn't the GTI. But when I went to, she had actually finished the ownership papers, and the keys were on the desk, and the insurance was done. But then she noticed something on the computer was wrong, and she went to the general manager's office. And they were looking at the computer and talking, and they're looking up at me, and I thought, okay, time to leave. And so because the keys were there, I just picked up the keys, the ownership papers, the title, and I left. And I got in my brand new Golf, and I drove off the lot. No license plate or anything, just drove straight home. And then waited to see what would happen. And sure enough, they called me, and I ignored the call, and they left a message saying, oh, Mr. Murray, you've left and you've taken the wrong car. We were selling you the grey car. Could you bring that car back? Blah, 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 blah. So I called my lawyer and I told him what had happened. And he said, did the VIN numbers match on the title and the description's fine and everything? I said, yeah. He says, then that's the car you own. Just ignore everything from them from this point on. And I did. And so began my love affair with that little Golf. I got it for a fraction of the cost that it should have been. And it came with 3 years of maintenance as part of the price. So I kept taking it back to that dealer to get maintenance. And I owned that car, I think, for 5 or 6 years, worry-free. It had no problems. Everyone, Becky used to drive it, my mum used to drive it, my dad used to drive it, everyone that visits drives it. And I owned it while I had the BMW, the red BMW, and I actually liked it more than the red BMW. I just loved that car. It was one of my favorite ever cars. It wasn't fast, it had an automatic transmission, it was just comfortable. It was such a sweetheart of a car. I thought it looked beautiful too. It was a dark blue, and it was just cool. It was, yeah, I had a real affection for that car. And because I got it for such a bargain, I was such a lucky find, I paid it forward and passed that car on to a friend who needed a good car, and I feel good about that. And you know, I had a genuine affection for that car. So yeah, that was my 2013 Golf, 2.5 litre, 170 horsepower, 6-speed automatic, affection rating of 10. Yes, I absolutely, one of my favorite ever cars was that very basic Golf SEL. Very, very cool car. So at the same time, after I'd given back the Porsche 911, the broken one, I decided to go back to BMW because I've had a pretty fault-free life with BMW so far, so why not get another good BMW? And that's when I got the red M4, which was featured quite a lot on this channel. And it was a good car, 2015, 430 horsepower or whatever they were. It only had a top speed of about 160 miles an hour because it has a rev limiter on it. And I really had no problems with that car. It was a comfortable car. I did lots of videos and I was pretty happy with it. I really loved how it looked and how it performed. But it was the first car I've ever owned that I had no connection with. And I am a person that gets overly emotional about inanimate objects like gorillas and cars. You know, if I see one of my old cars, I get really, you know, sad to see it again. I hope that the new owners are looking after it. But this car, strangely, I never felt that way. And the day that I sold it, I couldn't care less. You know, it was so strange. I was kind of glad to be rid of it. And it had never done anything wrong. It performed beautifully, looked pretty. Just, I don't know, maybe the sound it made, I don't know what it was. It just never resonated with me. And I did a lot of driving. I drove that car to Florida and back and did lots of things in it, lots of videos in it. But yeah, it just never resonated with me. So yeah, that's the first car I've ever owned that I didn't really care for some reason. So it only gets an affection rating of 3, even though it was a perfectly well-behaved car. Which leads us to the next Porsche 911, my most recent one, 2017 Carrera 4S with a manual transmission this time at last. Whatever that was, just 430 horsepower, and blue with the contrasting interior. I really loved the interior of that car. It was a very pretty car. I was very excited for that car. However, pretty soon into the ownership experience, it started doing this. It started showing that the tank was full. The gas tank was full all the time. Didn't matter how much gas was actually in the car, it was always full. So Porsche went and replaced the sensors and the gauges and the electronics and even replaced the gas tank in the end, but it still kept doing that. And then it started throwing up this message and other messages. And this car was still completely drivable. Unlike my previous 911, which was a dangerous disaster, this one was just always with the error messages and always with the gauges showing the wrong thing, just some weird anomaly. And they'd pulled, like I'd put a radar detector and a dash cam in, and everyone was blaming me for putting those things in, but Porsche pulled all that stuff out, like pulled out every accessory so the car was as basic as possible and replaced all that stuff, and it still kept doing this. And so it kept doing it for over a month, and in the end Porsche said, well, let's not have a Nick Murray video about this, let's just give you your money back or replace the car. So I was fine. So they just refunded me on that car, which is a shame because it was a good car. There was nothing really wrong with it. It was just constant error messages and gas gauge always showing full, and they just couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I'm sure they did in the end because the car got fixed after they brought it back for me and got resold. It's I think it's also down in Texas. Yeah, it sat for sale, way overpriced for ages on a site. I saw it last year or the year before. Yeah, everyone kept emailing it to me. Yeah, Nick, here's your old car. So somebody's got that. So if you own that car, do let me know. I'd love to see it again. But yeah, that was a cool car. I have an affection rating of 5 for that car because unfortunately I lost it again. But it was a nice car. I learned a lot from that car. Like I learned that I would never get an all-wheel drive 911 again. You know, it was cool in the snow, but it did suck some of the fun out of owning that car. I'm going to be rear-wheel drive from now on. And so then I started buying the Macans. Basically the day I gave back the C4S, I went into the showroom and they had a grey Macan S there. And I was, oh, what the hell, I'll just buy that. And that was the mistake I made. I just bought a car, like a configurable car off the showroom floor. What type of idiot does that? And I looked at it, oh, grey, I guess it's okay. But it had most of the features I wanted. Didn't have air suspension. And I hated that car. Oh man. Pretty soon, like maybe within 2 days, it might have even been the day I bought it. I parked it at the supermarket. I was at Whole Foods, parked it, and I looked back and I noticed it was one of like 6 SUVs all in a row that were all grey and silver, and I was, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? And that's all I could see from that point on. Everywhere I went, I'd park that car and it was just a sea of black, silver, white, grey cars. It was, I hated it. I absolutely started hating that car. Not because it was a bad car, it was perfectly fine. It was a very nicely configured Macan S. It's just the colour was, it's not me. I don't want to be part of the grey mediocre out there. It's just depressing having a grey car. So I quickly put an order in for a replacement of the same car basically, and I did a video on that. I ordered my current runaround car, which is the same model Macan S, 360 horsepower, whatever they are, but in Mamba green and with the air suspension. The air suspension just lowers it a bit, makes it look a little better. Different wheels, a few different options. Same exact price as the grey one. And couldn't be happier. Having a brighter coloured car with the air suspension. The dogs and I love that car. It's a joy. It's had a few little niggly problems, but generally it's been fine. It's all good. It's all good. And of course, as you know, last year I also purchased my my first doer-upper car, my Porsche 928S, 1986, and that was okay. It was beautiful looking, right? That car was such a beautiful looking car, nice color combination, but man, I didn't realize what I'd letting myself into. Like I was pouring money into that, trying to get it to be perfect. And the more money I poured into it, the more I disliked that car. It was just, you know, when you start really spending money on a car, just to keep it going. And every time I drove it, it was like $1,000, something else broken. So I didn't want to sell it on as a broken car. So I just knuckled down, fixed it as best I could, and then sold it. Lost like $16,000 or $70,000 on that car. In just a few months. It was very impressive loss of money on that car, but it was an experience. I will never own a 928 again. In fact, my neighbor just had a 928 come up, much better than my one was, 928 4S or S4, sorry, S4, yeah, and yeah, $5,000 or $6,000. It was a bargain, and I was, oh my God, this is a bargain. No, I'm not owning a 928 again. That was a terrible experience. So that was my 928, and then of course my current 911, which is the 993 and 1995, found me last year as well, and I couldn't be more delighted with that car. Yeah, it's such a sweet car. It's pretty beat up, but that's the way I like it. Kind of wish it wasn't a convertible, but I live with that. I quite like convertible during the summer. Yeah, but it's just such a pleasure to drive. I am sold on the 993 experience. It's such a wonderful car. Yeah, I'm really loving owning the 993. So if I replace the 993, I'll probably replace it with another 993, maybe a coupe version in green. But yeah, I'd like to get another new 911 at some point. It's just, I only have a 2-car garage, and I really love the 2 cars I have at the moment. So, and I wouldn't want to get rid of either of those for a new 911. So one day I will. But yeah, at the moment, 993, which I give an affection rating of 8, and my Porsche Macan, which I also give an affection rating of 8. Both great cars. I really like them. So yeah, that's my car history. I think this video's gone on way too long already, but yeah, I hope this has been mildly interesting to some of you, and I'd love to hear about any interesting cars you guys have had in the comments below. But yeah, that was really it. I grew up in a family that weren't at all interested in cars, so it took me a while to get into seeing cool cars, and I've been really lucky to experience the cars and being able to afford the cars that I have, and I really appreciate a good car when I have one. And of course I've made a lot of mistakes, just like everybody, and it doesn't bother me. It's all cool. So anyway, thanks for sticking with me and watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye then. And if you're wondering where to acquire the ridiculous t-shirts that I wear in my videos, they're all here in my store, all your favorites, including offensive stamps and my rapid dry towels as well. Yes, Nick Murray t-shirts, being a little inappropriate since 2016.